This poor girl goes to a millionaire and says, "Sir, I've been eating garbage for days." In an act of humility, he takes the girl to the best grocery store in town and says something that makes her cry on the spot. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching summer sun beat down on the boardwalk of downtown Seaside Heights. 6-year-old Jane, with matted curly hair and tattered clothes, bent down to pick up a discarded piece of bread when she bumped into someone and fell to the ground. Her big amber eyes, framed by premature dark circles, filled with tears as she looked up at the tall, well-dressed man who had tripped over her. "Hey, watch where you're going! You almost made me fall!" snapped Ted Miller, 47, pulling the cell phone away from his ear for a moment. His eyes flashed with irritation as he tried to maintain the tense conversation on the phone about the critical situation of his chain of hardware stores. "Mister, we've been eating garbage for days," Jane mumbled, her voice choked, still sitting. On the hot pavement, the girl's words hit Ted like a lightning bolt. For an instant, he was transported back to his own childhood on his Uncle Gus's rundown farm, the days without food, his mother's abandonment, the shame of wearing patched clothes to school. He abruptly hung up the phone, ignoring the protests of the bank manager on the other end. In the distance, a thin woman of about 35 watched the scene with apprehension. Irene wrung her hands against her chest, torn between the desire to run and protect her daughter and the fear of drawing even more attention. Her eyes, identical to Jane's, followed every move of the businessman. "Where's your mother?" Ted asked, his voice now softer, although it still carried the authoritarian tone, characteristic of someone who was used to giving orders. Jane timidly pointed to Irene, who immediately began to approach. "I'm sorry, sir. She didn't mean to bother you. We were just leaving," she said hastily, pulling Jane by the hand. Ted looked at the two of them, the barefoot girl, the mother, in a faded dress and worn sandals. Something about the scene bothered him deeply, beyond the obvious poverty. There was something familiar about Irene, as if he had seen her before, but he couldn't quite place where. "Come with me," he ordered, turning toward the nearest grocery store without waiting for an answer. Mother and daughter exchanged hesitant glances. "Buy whatever you need," he told Irene when they arrived, handing her his credit card. "Food, toiletries, whatever is necessary." As Irene walked through the aisles of the grocery store with Jane, filling the cart with basic foods and cleaning products, Ted watched them from afar. His cell phone didn't stop vibrating with calls from the bank, but for the first time in years, he chose to ignore the financial problems that were piling up. He watched as Jane, despite her obvious hunger, asked her mother before putting any item in the cart, "Is it okay, Mom? Is it too expensive?" The girl's premature maturity impressed and disturbed him at the same time. At the checkout, Irene tried to hold back tears as she separated some items, considering them superfluous. Ted, noticing the gesture, approached and said firmly, "Take everything." As they left the grocery store, loaded with bags, Ted surprised himself with his next decision. "I need someone to take care of cleaning my house. The salary is good, with benefits. Are you interested?" Irene's eyes widened, but something in her gaze betrayed more than simple surprise. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition and apprehension crossed her face. "Yes, of course. So when can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, this is the address," he replied, handing her a card. "At 7 o'clock. That night, in his empty mansion in the wealthiest neighborhood of town, Ted tried to understand the impulse that had led him to help those two strangers. Sitting in his office, surrounded by spreadsheets that showed increasingly worrisome numbers, his thoughts constantly returned to little Jane. The phone rang once again. It was Arthur, his accountant and right-hand man for over a decade. "Boss, the situation is critical. The national chain that arrived in town is crushing our prices. We need an urgent solution." Ted sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "We'll talk tomorrow, Arthur. I need to think." Meanwhile, in the small room they rented behind an old house, Irene put Jane to sleep in a makeshift bed, but now with a full stomach for the first time in days. When she was sure her daughter was asleep, she took a yellowed photo from inside, an old Bible. In the picture, an elegant woman smiled next to a younger Irene, both in front of a sumptuous Christmas tree. On the back of the photo, a dedication, "To my dear Irene, who makes this house a home. With love, Selina Miller." Irene pressed the photo against her chest, silent tears streaming down her face. "Forgive me, Mrs. Miller," she whispered into the silence of the night. "Forgive me for what I did." In the mansion, Ted poured himself another shot of whiskey when he noticed an object on his desk, an old photo frame he hadn't seen in years. In it, his deceased wife Selina smiled, radiant in a blue dress during the Seaside Heights Clam Fest. Something about the image disturbed him, but he couldn't quite identify what. Outside the mansion, a female figure watched the lights on in the office. Olivia adjusted her sunglasses, even in the darkness of the night, and typed a message on her cell phone. "He hired someone new. We need to change the plans." At 7 o'clock sharp the next morning, Irene stood before the imposing gates of the Miller mansion. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited, not only from the nervousness of the new job, but from being back in that place after so many years. Jane, by her side, admired the manicured garden with curious eyes. "Mommy, look at all the roses. It looks like a castle," whispered the girl, squeezing Irene's hand. Before she could answer, the electronic gate began to open. Ted appeared at the entrance, wearing an impeccable suit that contrasted with the deep circles under his eyes. His eyes lingered for a moment on Jane. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse. "You can come in. Sandra, the housekeeper, will show you your duties." He paused, looking at Jane. "The girl will she be okay alone?" Irene lowered her eyes. "Usually she stays with Mrs. Ziegler, our neighbor, but she traveled to see her sick daughter." "She can stay," interrupted Ted, surprising himself. "There's a TV room on the first floor, as long as she doesn't touch anything." While Sandra, a 60-year-old woman with a stern expression, showed Irene around the house, Jane settled on the huge sofa in the TV room. Her bare feet barely reached the floor. In the kitchen, Sandra was instructing Irene on her duties when the girl appeared. In the doorway, her eyes fixed on something on the wall. "That's a pretty picture of the lady in the blue dress." Ted, who was passing through the hallway on his way to his office, stopped abruptly. The photo that Jane was pointing to showed Selina during the Seaside Heights Clam Fest, smiling as she held a pearl necklace. It was the same image he had found the night before. "Don't touch that!" His voice came out harsher than he intended, making Jane shrink back. Irene quickly pulled her daughter close, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by Ted. "I'm sorry, sir," Irene murmured. "She won't touch anything." Something in the way Irene looked at Selina's photo once again awakened that uncomfortable feeling in Ted. There was too much familiarity in that look. The day passed tensely. While Irene cleaned the house, Ted locked himself in his office, drowning in worrisome numbers. The arrival of the national hardware store chain was devastating his business. 3 of his stores were already operating in the red. "The employees are nervous, Ted," Arthur said on the phone. "They're saying that Progress Construction cancelled the contract with us. Is it true?" Ted ran his hand over his face, exhausted. "It's not official yet, but yes, we can't compete with the competition's prices." "There's a woman wanting to see you," Arthur continued, hesitant. "Said it's important. Her name is Olivia." The name meant nothing to Ted, but something in the way Arthur pronounced it put him on alert. "I don't know any Olivia. Tell her I'm busy." Meanwhile, downstairs, Jane timidly explored the house. In a dimly lit hallway, a slightly open door revealed a room that seemed to have not been used for a long time. Inside it, on an old vanity, was a music box with mother-of-pearl details. Fascinated, Jane turned the small crank. A soft melody began to play, the same one that her mother used to hum to her to sleep. "Jane!" Irene's frightened voice made her jump. "Get out of there right now!" "But Mom, that music, it's the same one you—" "Enough!" Irene slammed the door of the room shut, her hands trembling. "You can't go into the rooms, I already told you." The noise caught the attention of Ted, who ran down the stairs quickly. Seeing the door to Selena's room closed and Irene pale next to it, his expression hardened. "What happened here?" "I'm sorry, sir," Irene began, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Sandra crossed the hallway hastily. "Mr. Miller, there's a woman named Olivia insisting on speaking with you. Said it's about Mr. Vargas." The name Vargas made Ted freeze. He hadn't heard from his old mentor in over 10 years, since the incident he preferred to bury in the past. "Send her in," he said finally, turning his gaze to Irene and Jane. "You can go for today. Come back tomorrow at the same time." As mother and daughter headed towards the back exit, an elegant woman entered through the front door. Olivia removed her sunglasses, revealing piercing green eyes that studied Ted with a disturbing intensity. "Mr. Miller," her voice was soft but carried a note of steel, "we need to talk about my father." On the way home, Jane didn't stop humming the melody of the music box. "Mommy, why did you never tell me you worked here before? I saw your picture with the lady in the blue dress hidden in the Bible." Irene stopped walking, her face losing all color. "Never repeat that, Jane. Never. Promise, Mommy?" "But Mommy, promise!" In the mansion, Olivia settled into the armchair in Ted's office, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "You haven't changed at all, Mr. Miller. The same stern expression as when you destroyed my father's dreams." Ted poured himself a whiskey, trying to disguise how his hands were trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your father made his own decisions." "Are you sure?" Olivia took an envelope from her bag. "Because I found some very interesting documents in Portugal about how you defrauded his construction company's contracts, about how you manipulated the numbers to make it look like he was embezzling money." The glass of whiskey slipped from Ted's fingers, shattering on the floor. At the same instant, thunder tore through the sky of Seaside Heights, announcing an approaching storm. Outside the mansion, Jane had convinced Irene to return to recover her forgotten doll. Standing under the office window, mother and daughter clearly heard when Olivia spoke her last words. "You have 1 week to confess everything, Mr. Miller, or I will make sure everyone knows how you built your empire on the ruins of my father's life." Irene held Jane tightly, her hands trembling. In the Bible, hidden in her purse, besides the photo with Selena, there was another object, a pen drive that held even darker secrets about Ted Miller's empire. The approaching storm broke over Seaside Heights with devastating force. Irene and Jane barely made it home before the streets turned into small rivers. In the tiny room they shared, Irene tried to control a persistent cough that had been accompanying her for weeks. "Mommy, are you sick?" asked Jane, her amber eyes full of concern as she helped her mother sit on the bed. "It's nothing, sweetie. Just a cold," Irene lied, hiding the blood-stained tissue under the pillow. The pain in her chest was getting worse, but she couldn't afford to get sick now. In the Miller mansion, Ted faced Olivia with a mixture of fear and anger. "What do you really want? Money?" Olivia laughed, a joyless sound. "Money? You still don't understand anything. I want justice. I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything, like my father felt." A new thunder shook the windows of the mansion. Ted poured himself another shot of whiskey, trying to organize his thoughts. "Your father made mistakes, Olivia. Just what? Forged documents? Bribed inspectors? Please, continue. I'm curious to hear your justifications. Before Ted could answer, his cell phone rang. It was Arthur, his accountant. Boss, we need to talk urgently. The situation is worse than we imagined. The next day, the rain was still falling when Irene and Jane arrived at the mansion. Sandra greeted them with an even sterner expression than usual. The boss left early, said the girl can't stay today. But Mrs. Sandra, I have nowhere to leave her, Irene pleaded, feeling a new wave of cough approaching. Your problem? Boss's orders. At that moment, an elegant car parked in front of the mansion. Olivia got out of it, protecting herself from the rain with an expensive umbrella. Her green eyes studied Irene with interest. Let the girl stay, Sandra, she said with authority. I can take care of her while her mother works. Sandra hesitated, but something in Olivia's tone did not allow for argument. Jane looked at her, mother, apprehensive. Everything will be okay, honey, Irene whispered, kissing her forehead. Behave yourself, okay? As Irene began her tasks, Olivia took Jane to the TV room. Did you know that I knew this house very well when I was a kid? Your boss and my father were great friends until he betrayed us. Jane, sitting on the sofa with her battered doll, listened attentively. Olivia continued, Want to see a secret place? There's a basement here that holds many interesting stories. At the Morel store's headquarters, Ted faced the worst meeting of his life. Progress Construction had officially cancelled all contracts, and 3 major suppliers demanded immediate payment of overdue debts. We need to file for bankruptcy, boss, said Arthur, nervously adjusting his tie. There's no other way. No, thundered Ted, slamming his fist on the table. I built this from scratch. I'm not going to lose everything now. Then you need to sell the mansion, replied Arthur. It's the only asset that can still save the company. Ted felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The mansion was more than a symbol of status. It was the last place where he could still feel Selina's presence. Back at the mansion, Irene was cleaning the room that had been Selina's when a severe dizzy spell made her stagger. She leaned on the old vanity, accidentally knocking over the music box. From the false bottom of the object, a small folded paper fell out. With trembling hands, Irene opened it. It was a letter from Selina, dated a few days before her departure. Dear Irene, if something happens to me, look in the basement behind the old bookcase. The truth needs to be known. Downstairs, Olivia was showing Jane old photos on her cell phone. See this lady here? It's Mrs. Miller, your boss's wife. She found out something terrible about him, you know? The lady in the blue dress, asked Jane, remembering the photo on the wall. My mom has a picture with her too. Olivia narrowed her eyes. Your mother knew Mrs. Miller. Before Jane could answer, Sandra rushed into the room. Irene fainted. Upstairs, I called an ambulance. The sound of the siren cut through the air a few minutes later. When the paramedics entered the mansion, they found Irene unconscious in Selina's room, clutching a paper to her chest. Very low blood pressure, said one of them. Possible tuberculosis. We need to take her now. Jane cried, clutching her doll. Mommy, wake up! Please, Mommy! Olivia, watching the scene, noticed something fallen near the vanity, a pen drive that had slipped out of Irene's bag. Discreetly, she picked it up and put it in her pocket. Ted returned to the mansion in the middle of the confusion. Seeing the ambulance and Jane crying, something inside him broke. I'll go with you, he told the paramedics, surprising everyone. At the hospital, while Irene underwent tests, Ted tried to calm Jane in the waiting room. The girl, exhausted, eventually fell asleep in his lap. She needs urgent treatment, the doctor informed him hours later. Tuberculosis in advanced stage. The treatment is expensive and long. Ted looked at Jane sleeping and made a decision. Do whatever is necessary, I'll pay. With what money? Arthur's voice surprised him. The accountant was standing in the doorway of the waiting room. The company is going bankrupt, Ted. You can't afford any treatment. There's always a way, replied Ted, his voice filled with determination. That night, while Irene slept under medication and Jane remained in Ted's care, Olivia plugged the pen drive into her laptop. Her eyes widened as she saw the content. My God, so that's how it happened. On the screen, documents and photos revealed a very different story from the one she knew about Selina's departure and about the role of her own father, Vargas, in that whole plot. In his apartment, Arthur received a mysterious call. Yes, she found the pen drive. No, Ted doesn't know anything yet. Soon he will lose everything. And we will take control. At the hospital, Ted looked out the window, the rain still falling outside. In his pocket, the card from his Uncle Gus, whom he hadn't seen in years, seemed to weigh a ton. Maybe it was time to swallow his pride and ask for help. But before he could make any decision, a nurse ran into the room. Mr. Miller, the patient. She disappeared. How did she disappear? Ted stood up abruptly, waking Jane, who was sleeping, in his lap. She's sick. She could barely stand. We found the bed empty during the rounds, explained the nurse, nervous. The hallway cameras show her leaving alone 20 minutes ago. Jane, still sleepy, clung to Ted's jacket sleeve. Where's my mommy? I'll find her, he promised, trying to keep his voice steady. Sandra, he called on the phone, come to the hospital to stay with Jane. I need to take care of something. The rain had diminished to a fine drizzle when Ted left the hospital. His first instinct was to drive to the house where Irene lived, but when he arrived, he found only an empty room and a worried neighbor. Sir, Irene did come by here, said Mrs. Ziegler, who had returned from her trip. She grabbed a bundle of clothes and ran off. She seemed too scared. Where does she usually go when she's nervous? Asked Ted, feeling a growing unease. The neighbor hesitated. Well, she always liked the clam fest. Even after she stopped working in the organization, she sometimes went there just to watch the preparations. Something about the mention of the festival made Ted shudder. It was Selina's favorite event, held annually in the town square. Preparations for this year's edition were beginning, with tents being set up under the persistent drizzle. On the way to the square, long repressed memories began to surface. Selina loved the festival, especially the seashell craft contest. Her last work had been a delicate jewelry box. Ted braked abruptly. The jewelry box. It was there that Selina kept her most important documents. In the confusion after her departure, he had never been able to find it. In the town square, some people sheltered from the drizzle under the partially assembled tents. Ted spotted a familiar figure, his Uncle Gus, who coordinated the assembly of his traditional sustainable crafts booth. Nephew? His uncle's deep voice surprised him. After so long, what brings you here? Before Ted could answer, a coughing fit caught his attention. Behind one of the tents, Irene was sitting on the ground, shivering with fever. For God's sake, you need to go back to the hospital. Ted ran to her, but Irene dodged him. I can't, she murmured, feverish. I need to find the jewelry box, the truth. What jewelry box? What are you talking about? Mrs. Miller's, she replied, her eyes shining with fever. The one she made at the last festival. Before leaving, she asked me to keep it. Gus approached, his wrinkled face showing concern. Selina? Ted? This woman worked for your wife? At that moment, Ted's cell phone rang. It was Sandra in a panic. Sir, the girl is gone. She heard two people talking about her mother in the hospital hallway and ran off. Ted's blood ran cold. What people? That Mrs. Olivia and your accountant, Arthur. They didn't see me, but I heard them talking about a pen drive and some of Mrs. Miller's documents. On the other side of town, Olivia stared at her laptop. screen, tears streaming down her face as she read the files on the pen drive. "Dad, how could you, all this time?" The documents revealed a much more complex plot than she had imagined. Her father, Vargas, had not only been a victim of Ted's ambition, he was part of a much larger scheme involving embezzlement of public money in construction contracts. Selena had discovered everything, and Irene had been a witness. "It's not quite like that," Arthur's voice startled her. He was standing in the doorway of her office, a cold smile on his face. "Your father and Ted were partners in the scheme, but Selena found out and threatened to report it. So Vargas decided it was time to retire in Portugal and let Ted take all the blame." "How do you know all this?" asked Olivia, her voice trembling. "Because I helped your father forge the documents that incriminated Ted," he replied, approaching. "And now I need that pen drive." In the town square, Irene tried to get up, leaning on Ted. "Jane, I need to find my daughter." "First you go back to the hospital," he insisted. "Then we'll look for her together." "There's no time!" shouted Irene, a new coughing fit making her stagger. "She knows the hiding place. She'll look for it there." "What hiding place?" "In the basement of the mansion, behind the old bookcase, where Mrs. Miller hid the evidence." Gus, who was watching everything, put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Ted, this story is not adding up. Selena would never leave you alone without a very serious reason." "Uncle, now is not the time." "Now is the time. Yes," thundered the old man. "You've spent 10 years running from the truth. It's time to face your demons." Thunder tore through the sky, announcing the return of the storm. Ted looked at Irene, shivering with fever, then at his uncle, whose stern expression hid an ancient wisdom. "The jewelry box," Irene murmured. "Selena hid everything in the jewelry box, but it disappeared on the day of the accident." "What accident?" asked Ted, feeling his heart tighten. Before Irene could answer, his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Mr. Miller, this is social services. We found your employee Jane wandering alone near the old factory. Considering the precarious situation of her mother and the anonymous reports we received about neglect, we will have to take the girl to a temporary shelter." "No!" shouted Irene, who was listening to the conversation. "Not my daughter." In her office, Olivia faced Arthur. "You helped my father destroy a family." "Business is business," he replied coldly. "And now, with Ted's bankruptcy, I will finally take control of everything. The stores, the contracts, everything he built will be mine. And what makes you think I won't report everything?" Arthur's smile widened. "Because that would destroy your father too. And you don't want that, do you?" At the old factory, Jane huddled in a corner, hugging her battered doll, while social workers tried to convince her to go with them. The girl had run there following the instructions she had heard her mother murmur during the fever. Something about a hiding place and a treasure that would save everyone. The rain returned in full force over Seaside Heights. In different parts of town, lives intertwined by secrets and lies approached an inevitable confrontation. Ted, driving through the storm with Irene burning with fever in the passenger seat, did not know that he was about to discover a truth that would change everything he believed about his past, his present, and his future. "Quick," murmured Irene, delirious, "before it's too late." The storm transformed the streets of Seaside Heights into veritable rivers when Ted's car stopped abruptly in front of the old factory. Through the fogged-up windows, he saw the lights of the social services vehicles. "Stay in the car," he told Irene, who was trembling with fever. "I'll get Jane." "No!" She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "We need to go to the basement first. It's our only chance." "What chance? What are you talking about?" "The evidence that will save us all is in the jewelry box. Mrs. Miller hid..." Before she could finish, a new coughing fit made her double over in pain. Ted hesitated, torn between the urgency of finding Jane and the need to understand the mystery that Irene was trying to reveal. His cell phone rang. It was Olivia. "Mr. Miller, I need to meet you now. Arthur, he's not who we thought he was." "I don't have time for that," he replied sharply. "He's going to your mansion." Her voice was filled with panic. "He knows about the basement, about the jewelry box, about everything." At that moment, Ted saw headlights approaching at high speed in the rearview mirror. It was Arthur's car. "Hold on," he shouted to Irene, accelerating through the storm. In the back seat, the voice of his Uncle Gus, who had insisted on accompanying them, sounded grave. "Nephew, it's time for you to know the truth about Selina." At the old factory, Jane had managed to escape the social workers by hiding in the rubble that she knew so well. It was there that she used to play when her mother still worked on the production line. "There has to be a way," she murmured to her doll, remembering her mother's feverish words. "The treasure that will save everyone." Her fingers touched something familiar, a small box decorated with seashells, partially buried under rubble. Ted's car skidded at the entrance to the mansion. Arthur, hearing the noise, cursed and accelerated his search in the basement. The formula," Gus continued as they ran inside. "It was too revolutionary. Big companies wanted to steal it, destroy it. And my mother. She fled to protect the formula. But first, she left clues. With Selina." Irene tried to get up, but her legs gave way. "Mrs. Miller found out everything, left the evidence in the jewelry box." A crash from the basement made everyone jump. Arthur's voice echoed triumphant. "I found it!" Ted ran downstairs, followed by Gus, who was supporting Irene. In the basement, Arthur was holding a yellowed envelope. "It's over, Ted," he grinned maniacally. "You're going to lose everything, the stores, the reputation, everything." "Not if I can help it." A child's voice sounded from the small basement window. It was Jane, soaked and dirty, holding the seashell jewelry box. How did you find it?" Arthur stammered. "At the factory, where my mom hid it after Mrs. Miller asked her to." Olivia appeared in the basement doorway, breathless. "I just spoke to my father in Portugal. He confessed everything, Arthur. The scam, the fraud, how you manipulated all of us." At that moment, Irene staggered down the stairs. "Daughter, you did it." Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Ted caught her before she fell. "Quick!" shouted Gus. "She needs a doctor!" Arthur, taking advantage of the confusion, tried to run but slipped on the wet floor. The envelope in his hands flew open, scattering documents all over the basement. "That's not the proof you wanted," said Jane, opening the jewelry box. From inside it, she pulled out a small, handwritten notebook. "The real proof is here." Ted took the notebook with trembling hands. On the first page, his mother's familiar handwriting. "My son, if you are reading this, the time for the truth has finally come." The storm raged outside, but in the basement of the mansion, time seemed to have stopped. In his arms, Irene breathed with difficulty. Jane, soaked and exhausted, still held the jewelry box, as if her life depended on it. And in a way, it did. Because inside that delicate handcrafted piece was not only the salvation of Ted's empire, but the key to healing wounds that 3 generations had carried. "Read," whispered Irene, her feverish eyes fixed on the notebook. "Read before it's too late." The words of conception, written more than 40 years ago, echoed in the basement as the storm raged outside. "My son, if you are reading this, the time for the truth has finally come. I didn't abandon you by choice, but to protect something bigger than both of us. Your Uncle Gus and I discovered a way to revolutionize construction, a technique that could provide decent housing for thousands of needy families. But powerful people wanted to steal our discovery. I had to flee to protect the formula, and especially to protect you." Ted needed to sit on the bottom step of the stairs, his legs giving way. Beside him, Irene coughed violently, the fever getting higher and higher. "We need to take her to the hospital," he said, trying to get up, but Irene stopped him. "No, finish reading. I need you to understand." Jane knelt next to her mother, still holding the jewelry box. Olivia, standing in the basement doorway, kept her eyes fixed on Arthur, making sure he didn't try to run again. Gus continued reading. "The formula we created uses only natural materials from our region. The red clay from the Jersey pine barrens, ground seashells from the Jersey shore, and palm fibers. Together, these elements create a mortar more resistant than traditional cement, totally sustainable, and much cheaper. That's why the clam fest was so important to Selina," Ted murmured, the pieces finally falling into place. "Yes," whispered Irene, gathering strength. "She found out the truth when she found this notebook in her mother's old room. That's when she started investigating the adulterated materials that Arthur was buying. And that's when she came to me," Gus completed. "But before we could act, She gave me all the evidence," Irene interrupted. "She asked me to keep it in a safe place, the jewelry box she made at the festival. She used your mother's old technique. The shells aren't just decoration." Jane, with the wisdom of children, began to examine the jewelry box more closely. Her little fingers found an almost imperceptible bump. "There's something in here," she exclaimed, managing to open a secret compartment in the base of the object. From inside it, a pen drive fell out, different from the one Olivia had found before. Along with it, there was a folded paper with Selina's handwriting. "Ted, when you find this, I hope you understand why I needed to leave. Arthur found out that I knew about the adulterated materials and threatened to expose a secret from your past, how you had obtained your first financing using forged documents. It was a trap. If I reported the material scheme, you would be destroyed too. So I decided to investigate further." "She found out everything," said Olivia, her voice filled with bitterness. "How Arthur manipulated my father and yours, how he defrauded contracts, how he planned to take control of everything." "But she didn't run away," completed Irene, a new coughing fit making her tremble. "She was gathering evidence. She was going to report everything until she had the accident," interrupted Arthur, a cruel smile on his lips. "How convenient, wasn't it?" "Shut up!" shouted Ted, advancing against him, but Gus held him back. "No, nephew, he wants to provoke you, but now we have all the evidence." Olivia had already connected the pen drive to her laptop. "It's all here. The fraudulent contracts, the false invoices, the adulterated technical reports, and Mrs. Conception's original formula." At that moment, Irene began to convulse. Jane screamed, clinging to her mother. "Enough!" thundered Ted. "We're going to the hospital now." In the hospital emergency room, while the doctors attended to Irene, Ted held Jane in his lap. The girl, exhausted, finally fell asleep, clinging to her battered doll. "She trusts you," observed Gus, "just like Selina trusted you." Olivia approached, her laptop open. "Mr. Miller, Ted, you need to see this. These are the last files Selina recorded before the accident. In the video, Selina appeared in her office at the mansion. If you are seeing this, we made it. Mrs. Conception's formula will revolutionize construction, but more than that, it will correct a historical wrong. Ted, your empire doesn't need to be built on lies. You have a chance to start over, to make a difference." Silent tears ran down Ted's face. In the video, Selina continued, "Irene has been much more than an employee. She is the only one I can trust to keep this truth. And little Jane, she reminds me of you when you were a child, with that same inner strength." The doctor interrupted the video display. "Mr. Miller, the patient is stabilized, but she will need intensive treatment. The problem is that the type of medication needed is very expensive. "Money is no problem," said Gus, surprising everyone. "The formula we found, I've already registered the patent in Ted's name. The largest construction companies in the country will want to buy the rights to use it. And I will testify about all of Arthur's frauds," completed Olivia, "including about Selena's accident not being an accident." 3 months later, the Seaside Heights Clamfest was busier than ever. In the town square, a plaque inaugurated the new sustainable mortar factory Conception and Miller. Irene, still using a cane but already recovered, watched proudly as Jane presented her own work with seashells at the Children's Craft Fair. "She has talent," said Ted, approaching with a cup of the coffee that Irene had prepared. She was now his partner in the management of the factory, no longer an employee. "Just like Mrs. Miller," she replied, smiling. "Did you know that she wants to be an engineer?" "Really?" Ted felt his heart warm. "Well, she'll need someone to teach her math." "And a father," completed Gus, who approached with Olivia. The young woman, after discovering the whole truth, had decided to stay in Seaside Heights to help implement the company's social project. Ted looked at Jane, who came running to show her creation, a small jewelry box decorated with seashells, made with the same technique that Selena had used. "Open it, Uncle Ted," she asked excitedly. Inside the jewelry box there was a drawing, Jane, Irene and him holding hands with a big heart in the background. "The three of us," she explained, "a family." Ted felt his eyes well up. It wasn't the kind of empire he had dreamed of building, but it was infinitely more valuable. The factory thrived using the sustainable technique created by his mother and his uncle. The old hardware stores were transformed into vocational training centers for needy people. Arthur awaited trial, and the truth about Selena had finally been revealed. But none of that compared to the feeling of having finally found his true treasure, a family. "Come on, honey," he called, picking Jane up in his arms, the first time he had called her that. "Let's go see the sunset from Barnegat Lighthouse. They say it reveals our true destiny." As they walked up the path, Irene held his free hand. In the sky, loaded clouds promised another summer storm. But now they were no longer afraid of the rain. After all, storms sometimes bring much more than water. They bring new beginnings.